Here you go. Welcome to our study in the Gospel of Luke. We are in Luke chapter 11. Turn there if you haven't already. Luke chapter 11. And we began, I don't know, it was last week or a couple weeks ago, this section where Jesus is attacking the Pharisaical system. And as we have termed it in the vernacular of today, expanded it to religion, calling this section the hazards of religion. So let's read back at verse 37 on to where we are going to begin today, verse 40. Now, when he had spoken, or while he was speaking, a Pharisee asked him to have lunch with him. And what do we say that lunch really was? Everybody say it together. Brunch. Yeah. So two people remembered that. And he went in and reclined. When the Pharisee saw it, he saw what? Him just reclining without washing his hands. When the Pharisee saw it, he was surprised that he had not first ceremonially washed before the meal. And remember what was the word that's translated ceremonially washed? Baptized. But the Lord said to him, "Now you Pharisees clean the outside of the cup and of the platter, but inside of you are full of robbery and wickedness." And that's as far as we got last week, I think. So to this point, we have seen in the hazards of religion, the false religion loves man-made symbols. And that is the tradition of washing hands or baptizing your hands before a meal. It had nothing to do with cleanliness. It was just a tradition. And we also saw the false religion loves the sinful. And that's the point Jesus is making with the cup, that the outside is clean, but the inside is full of robbery and wickedness. And so religion loves to make a show of the outside without cleaning the inside. And he's going to continue in that theme as we look at verses 40 and 41, where we see that false religion loves the simplistic. So verse 40, he says, "You foolish ones, did he who made the outside make the inside also?" So he calls them fools here. Now, didn't Jesus say elsewhere not to call somebody a fool? Well, you'll be happy to know that this is a different word than what he used in that case. He's not violating his own rule about calling people fools. This is a different word, which you may be familiar, some of you, with the alpha primitive, that if you put an A in front of a word, it negates the word. And this is one of those words. It means someone without reason or intelligence, or someone who's not thinking. So he's basically saying, you guys are not thinking. And it was a word commonly used in that culture. In this case, their foolishness had become a cloak for sin, designed to countenance wickedness. Now, I want to look at the expression "he who made" here, because upon the first 50 times that I read this verse, I perceived that Jesus was talking about God who made the outside and the inside of the vessel, meaning men. And maybe I was led that way because, at least in my version, the he is capitalized. How many of yours has it capitalized? Okay. Not everybody. Well, reading some of what the early 19th century expositor John Brown had to say in this passage caused me to reconsider. He pointed out that the word translated made can have the meaning of put in proper order or to make clean, much in the same way that we use the word when we state, I made my bed, as in putting it in proper order in which to sleep. I don't mean I actually created my bed or even put it together. I just put it in order. And that's how this word is often used. So based upon this information, I re-examined what Jesus is saying here in the context of everything he's saying. And it seems to fit better into the context to see the he who made as referring to the one who was washing or tidying the outside and inside of the dinnerware rather than he who created it. You following me? One doesn't clean the outside of a cup and leave the inside dirty. But this is exactly what the Pharisees were doing with their legalism. They were looking all spick and span on the outside, while they were filthy on the inside with robbery and wickedness. And when he asks this question, did not the one who made the outside make the inside also? It expects an affirmative response by the construction in Greek grammar. So what's he saying? He's saying the person who cleaned the outside also is in charge of cleaning the inside. And so the impetus for the cleaning of the cup and the platter is upon the person whose it is, that is the Pharisees. And then verse 41 it also is a difficult verse. But give that which is within as charity, mine says, and then all things are clean for you. The Greek scholar A.T. Robertson expresses the opinion that Jesus is arguing for the giving of alms, the things within the dishes. In other words, and some of the commentators put it like this: you know, their insides are full of robbery and wickedness because they stole from people, and that Jesus is saying you need to give back some of what you stole. And that's the gist of a lot of what the commentators say. But that which they had received through treachery ought to be restored to their victims is certainly true, but I'm not sure that's what Jesus is arguing here. I think rather he's making the argument that the inner man demonstrates his cleanliness through acts of charity, as Vincent, who wrote Vincent's Word Studies, puts it. Your virtue consists in washing the outside and making a respectable appearance. Cultivate rather the loving brotherly spirit of inward righteousness, which will prompt you to give of the food which the vessels contain, that which is within, to your suffering brother. So in other words, give that which is within as charity, then all things are clean for you, is referring to the fact that if you clean up your inside, then you will be a giving person instead of one full of wickedness and robbery. All right, so a couple difficult phrases here to put together, but I think if you think about it, you'll see that hopefully my explanation fits. Oops, I had that on screen, didn't put it up. Fits the context of what Jesus is saying to these Pharisees. All right, maybe that's just too outside the normal understanding of this to be able to comment on, but do you have any comments or questions? I see this as clear as mud or convincing.
Could this be like when he called them whited
Yes.
sepulchres?
Yes. Exactly. Full of dead man's bones. Yep. In fact, I think we're going to get to something similar to that in a minute.
This makes me think of that advertisement. It says, he gets us. Nah, I don't think. We gotta get him.
Yeah.
It makes me think about it. think.
Well, I understand, what they're trying to communicate is that Jesus understands us, which is true, but that's not the issue that we need to address. Yeah. Okay, any other comments? All right, verse 42. We come to woe one. Can't say that too fast. And that is, a false religion loves the secondary. He says, but woe to you, Pharisees, for you pay tithe of mint and rue and every kind of garden herb. Let's just address that first of all. What do you think of when you hear the word woe? And don't say riding a horse. Different woe. What do you think of? WOE. Warning. Condemnation.
Shame on you.
Shame on you. Yeah.
That one, yeah.
How about this word? Are you familiar with the word lament?
Yes.
Let me suggest to you that even though the word woe is used as a declaration of judgment, that we may need to think of it at least partially in another way. But let's look back at the Old Testament. We see over and over again how Jesus uses things from the Old Testament to communicate, because these guys knew the Old Testament. So I thought it would be nice to read a portion from the Old Testament that contains these ideas, and certainly would have been brought to the mind of the Pharisees. So turn back to Isaiah chapter 5. Isaiah chapter 5. Or as they say in the British world, Isaiah, which is probably more phonetically correct, right, Beth? Isaiah. Chapter 5. I'm looking at this now. Did I really intend to read this whole chapter? I'm sure when I read something, I look scripture up on Bible Gateway and read it on there, and it seems like it goes pretty quickly. Now I'm looking in my Bible, and this covers 3 pages. I'm rethinking the advisability of reading the whole thing.
First started, was,
Yeah.
But okay, maybe we can. Yeah, it's so hard to just jump in. Well, let me just say that at the beginning of it, he's talking about God is talking about the vineyard, which often refers to Israel, and all the care he put into building a vineyard. And boy, this fits so well into the parable of the vineyard, if you remember that in Mark 11 or 12. Verse 4, what more was there to do for my vineyard than I've not done? I expected to produce good grapes, etc. And then verse 7, the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel. And then verse 8. Okay, so verse 8 says, woe to those who add house to house and join field to field until there's no more room, so that you have to live alone in the midst of the land. So they're more concerned with gaining property and building. In my ears, the Lord of hosts has sworn, surely many houses shall become desolate. Yeah, you're all concerned about building houses? Okay, they're all going to come down. Even great and fine ones without occupants. For 10 acres of vineyard will yield only 1 bath of wine. Let's skip on down to the next woe. So he's saying their crops are going to fail. Woe to those who rise early in the morning that they may pursue strong drink. So the first woe was against those who just are trying to accumulate wealth through property and building houses. The second one is against those who, first thing in the morning, they got to have a drink. Who stay up late in the evening that wine may inflame them. So they're alcoholics. And talk about their banquets. They don't pay attention to the deeds of the Lord, nor do they consider the work of his hands. Verse 12. Verse 13. Therefore my people go into exile for their lack of knowledge, and their honorable men are famished, and their multitude is parched with thirst. and it talks about Jerusalem's splendor, all the stuff that's going to happen to them. Verse 16, the Lord of hosts will be exalted in judgment. The holy God will show himself holy in righteousness. Then the lambs will graze as in their pasture, and strangers will eat in the waste places of the wealthy. Verse 18, woe to those who drag iniquity with the cords of falsehood, and sin as if with cart ropes. So they're ones who are involved in sinful activities. And then verse 20, woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who substitute darkness for light and light for darkness, who substitute bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter. Verse 21, woe to those who are wise in their own eyes and clever in their own sight. It's getting more and more like the Pharisees here that he's talking about, although all these things apply to them, but especially this, remember he talked before about the darkness. Make sure the darkness or the light you think you have isn't really darkness. Verse 22, woe to those who are heroes in drinking wine and valiant men in mixing strong drink, who justify the wicked for a bribe and take away the rights of the ones who are in the right. And then from there he goes on to talk about the judgment that's coming. And there are other passages in the Old Testament that talk about the woes that are coming. Now, what's interesting, and I just thought of this, if you go over chapter 6, we find another woe. And that's in verse 5. Isaiah is talking about being or seeing, verse 1, the Lord sitting on a throne, and all the description there, the seraphim above him and all that. And he sees the seraphim crying out, holy, holy, holy is the Lord of hosts. The whole earth is full of his glory. And the foundations trembled. And then verse 5, then I said, woe is me. So what is Isaiah saying when he's using woe here?
Like
yeah, because he deserves judgment. The woes that we found back in chapter 5 are pronouncements of judgment upon these leaders of Israel because they're doing things without regret, without repentance, without understanding that what they're doing is against God. Isaiah sees the holiness of God and he says, woe, not just because of judgment that's coming to a person who deserves it, because he says, I'm a man of unclean lips, but it's coming to a person who is lamenting that, is repentant of that. So you see how woe can have a slight variance in understanding depending on the context. Okay, now back to Luke chapter 11. These are definitely declarations of judgment upon the Pharisees. But I wonder if it might not be helpful for us to understand that the word woe may reflect anguish, not just anger. The anguish of the person speaking it. I think of what Jesus said in another place about how he would wish to gather Jerusalem under his wings like a hen does his chicks, but they wouldn't. And how when he's pronouncing these woes upon the Pharisees, I think we have a tendency to think of him as pointing the finger and say, whoa, whoa, whoa. But maybe he's also saying, woe, in the sense of, I'm in anguish for you because of the judgment that's coming. Can't prove that by the word, but I think it could be included. Yeah.
Just in defining the anguish, what I'm hearing is that Jesus could be saying, I am so sad that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's at least a possibility that we are, because Jesus said in John 3 that he didn't come into the world to condemn the world, but that the world through him might be saved. And so I'm thinking with that kind of an attitude toward these Pharisees, that he is pronouncing judgment, yeah, because of what they're doing, but also is lamenting the fact that they are closing themselves off from God, as well as leading others astray. I don't know. Just a thought. All right, let's look at what he says to them. What are you, Pharisees? You pay tithes. The word tithe literally means take a tenth off. But it's not like most of us think today. We think of a tithe as being of our income, and some people, discuss, well, is a tenth of my gross income or my net income? But for the Jewish people, it wasn't income. It was possessions. So you had to consider what you owned, and periodically, I suppose it was yearly, I don't remember for sure. I think yearly, pay a tenth to the temple of what you owned. And so that's why they're taking a tenth of things from the garden. Let's go back to Leviticus 27, if we can see the background for this. Leviticus, that oft-read book. Leviticus 27. I remember as a young man, I think junior high, decided to read through the Bible. And I got to Leviticus. I didn't get very far in Leviticus. Right. I gave it up and went to the Psalms. Leviticus 27, I'm sorry. I say not say the chapter. Very end of Leviticus 27, verses 30 to 33. One of the very last things that are written here. Thus all the tithe of the land, of the seed of the land, or the fruit of the tree is the Lord's. It is holy to the Lord, set apart to the Lord. If therefore a man wishes to redeem part of his tithe, he shall add to it 1/5 of it. For every 10th part of herd or flock, whatever passes under the rod, the 10th shall be holy to the Lord. And again, the herd and flock, that's not things that were just born. That's the herd that they possess. He is not to be concerned whether it is good or bad, nor shall he exchange it. Or if he does exchange it, then both it and its substitute shall become holy. It shall not be redeemed. These are the commandments which the Lord commanded Moses for the sons of Israel at Mount Sinai. All right, so it is over what they own. If you want to read further than that, go to book of Deuteronomy. It reiterates it as they're about to go into the promised land, Deuteronomy 14 and Deuteronomy 26. So tithing marked an important feature of Phariseeism because it's something that they could do to show how holy they were, how righteous they were. Now, someone said the three key distinctions of a Pharisee were not to make use nor to partake of anything that had not been tithed, to observe the laws of purification. Now, two of those two things Jesus has kind of just addressed here. And as a consequence of these two, to abstain from familiar intercourse with all non-Pharisees. This separation, the separatist attitude they had toward those who didn't follow the prescriptions they had for tithing and purification, formed the ground of their claim to distinction. They are above everybody else. They're distinguished among all the people of Israel because they alone keep the tithe and the laws of purification and don't associate with anybody who doesn't. Harkens back to my youth. I don't. I can't think how it goes. I don't drink, smoke or chew, or go with girls that do. Yeah.
I did.
Of course, in the church I grew up in, it, added listen to rock music or go roller skating or go to movies. And then there was a second degree separation is you don't associate with anybody who doesn't follow your rules.
You couldn't listen to Billy Graham because he was too ecumenical.
He associated with people that were
Right.
not separatists. And
Right.
so If it's more, I mean, the more I think about my youth and the churches, it fits so much into Pharisaism. But they wouldn't have thought so. I guess the Pharisees didn't say anything wrong either. So the Pharisees were so meticulously careful in their tithing. And what Jesus is pointing out here, it wasn't just tithing sheep and big things like that. They were so careful, they counted individual leaves and seeds from their herb garden. Can you imagine that? Counting the individual. So I'm thinking, we have a perennial garden, and some of the things we have in pots are some my mind's gone blank. Different kinds of mints. And I was thinking because they have a lot of leaves, but but I can imagine counting all those leaves and then counting what is a tenth of that. They're doing that.
And
And
do that, we wouldn't have the garden.
yeah, just wouldn't have the garden. Now, one of the things he points out that I didn't know what it was, and do all the translations say rue?
Just look it up.
It says rue, yeah.
Did you look
I
it
guess
up?
because there's no other word for it.
You look it up?
Yeah, I looked it up. Here's what a rue looks like. And apparently has a lot of health benefits. I found this slide on the right. Helps control eczema and acne. Removes gas from the body, hopefully not too quickly. Relaxes the eyes, heart rate, just digestion. We need to start growing some rue, Beth.
Although it does say online, there's no good scientific evidence to support these uses.
Of course. Well, if a pharmaceutical company doesn't come up with it, then there's no scientific
Well,
evidence.
that was from WebMD.
Yeah. All right. What was that?
For hairs. I don't know.
For hairs, yeah.
Hairs.
Strengthens your hair, maybe. I don't know. Okay, so anyway, you can see this is a small plant and they're counting the leaves, and Jesus used that as an example. John Calvin says, in the time of Christ, they had sunk to such depth of folly that they made religion to consist entirely in absolute trifles. And that's the hazard, as I've entitled this thing, the hazard of religion, because that can be true today as well. That religion can consist entirely of absolute trifles and not the important stuff.
Wanted to share, I was in Barbados for work this week, and my driver from the airport over to the resort pointed out a church. Like, I was in the car 30 seconds, and like, oh, that's a church over there. And so I said, do you go to church? He said, I used to. And I said, well, why don't you go anymore? He said, it's just wrong. He said, and one of the things he mentioned was the people who are too poor to give 10% of their cash give from their garden. And he said, and then these pastors take the food and sell it off to the rich people that they're friends with who give the tithe for a discounted price than what they would have to pay. He said, it's so disgusting. These people work so hard and that's all they have to give. And instead of them helping the poor people. So anyways, it goes back to what we talked about last week with, having to do all that stuff, and it's not love-based, it's not biblical, but that's still happening. It's still about doing, and how he is so angry and he won't go to church. And he also talked about how Bibles are interpreted wrong. So anyways, it was a great conversation, but it's so sad. It's so sad how stuff like this is still keeping people away from God, the Bible. Still happening.
Yeah. Well, there's a friend of mine from back when I pastored a church that when I have seen him, asked him about church, and he hasn't gone to church in a couple decades probably. And he says, I just can't take the politics anymore. Because that's what he saw so often. And that's the trivial stuff. And then the last thing he said on the alternative side, which we kind of mentioned, and yet disregard justice, and the love of God. Disregard means pass by, to pass by. Justice, which is really reflective of the second greatest commandment, that is to love your neighbor as yourself. That's loving justice and the love of God, which is the first greatest commandment. So what's Jesus saying here? Look, you guys are so careful about counting the leaves on these little plants and tithing it, but you don't love the two things, the two greatest things that you're supposed to be doing, the commandments of God. Expositor John Brown posits the following questions, which get to the heart of the matter. Why did he pay tithe of mint, anise, and cumin? The answer is God commanded it. Well, then why did he neglect judgment and the love of God? Did God not command these also? The Pharisees had forgotten the basis of the law in the love for God and love for people. Their theme song had become, what's love got to do with it? They put the emphasis upon the trivial and neglected the essentials. And then Jesus says, but these,
Did you think that of yourself?
no. But these are the things you should have done without neglecting the others. These are what you ought to have done. There's nothing wrong with observing the tithing of minor items, but more important is the observance of of justice and love. But the Jewish leaders saw it differently. The Mishnah lays it down that it is more important to observe the scribal interpretations than the law itself. So they're saying it's more important to follow the traditions than the law itself. That's dangerous territory. Which, if you come on Sunday nights, you would be hearing about the Reformation and know that that's exactly the situation that the Roman Catholic Church was in the 16th century. Traditions became more important than the scripture themselves. Yes, yes.
People
Yep.
time more than administering to
Yep.
those in need. Still.
Yep. That's why this is a message not only about Phariseeism, not only about fundamentalism and legalism, but it's also about our everyday perception of what we're doing as Christians today in the church. Yeah.
I think it's in James, but show me your faith without works.
Yeah.
And I'll show you my faith with works.
Mm-hmm.
The true faith causes us to do. And if there's no doing, you have to kind of question, because then there's no fruit, right?
Yeah.
And so we're not showing fruit. They can talk the talk, but they won't walk in the walk.
And a great evidence of that is love for one another. As John says in 1 John, if you don't love your brother, you don't love God. The one who says he loves God but doesn't love his brother knows he's a liar. Yeah. Okay, something for us all to think about. And next week we'll continue looking at false religion, and we'll get to woe to.
Feels pretty good.
Hey, Bill, are you taking these in some way?
Yes,
So I can access them back.
Sunday morning Bible study is available on YouTube.
Okay.
So you can even go back to the beginning.
Yeah.
And go through. And
4 years worth of movies.
3 or 4 years worth. It's on the church's YouTube site, as is Sunday night going through church history.
I haven't searched for it, but I have been being with you all and your teaching.
Oh, good. Thank you.
When is the place that Minnie's getting married? I never heard.
Even